Good morning. Creationism versus evolution, Part 7. We are going to go to this page here, K03.htm. Okay. And we're just going to look at physical evidence from the earth which testifies to a recent creation. In the introduction, I quote from Whitcomb and Morris's book, The Genesis Flood, right here. I'm not the scientist, I'm quoting scientists' books. And they say the uniformitarian geologists of the 19th century, rejecting the biblical testimony of deterioration and catastrophe and all the geological implications thereof, and accepting instead the philosophy of evolutionary naturalism, built their system of historical geology upon a foundation of sand. The result is what Dr. Robin S. Allen called the present deplorable state of our discipline. Robin Allen, Geological Correlation and Paleoecology, a bulletin of the Geographical Society of America, wrote, "The philosophy of evolutionary naturalism is a pseudoscience composed of a patchwork of circular reasoning, Procrustean, arbitrarily and erroneously forced interpretations, pure speculation and dogmatic authoritarianism, a system purporting to expound the entire evolutionary history of the earth and its inhabitants, yet all the while filled with innumerable gaps and contradictions. There is no quarrel with the data of even the historical geologists, but only with the interpretation of those data. The data in which historical geology has been based are almost entirely paleontological, fossil-based, and the interpreted framework has been that of uniformitary and evolution, both of which are not supported by the evidence. Uniformitarianism is defined as the false notion in this context that geological and biological happenings which have been observed in recent history can be used to explain events in the unobserved past. Any real knowledge of origins or of Earth history antecedent to human historical records can only be obtained through divine revelation. You have to be there or get somebody reliable to report it. You can take a wild guess, but it won't be scientific. Because it is highly important for man to understand the nature of his origin as well as that of the earth on which he dwells, and because the impossibility of his ever really knowing about these matters otherwise, it is eminently reasonable that his Creator would in some way reveal to him at least the essentials concerning them. This is ample warrant, both spiritually and scientifically, for seeking to build a true science of earth history on the framework revealed in the Bible rather than on uniformitarian and evolutionary assumptions. This should be done not with the attitude of trying to make the Bible accounts fit into the data and theories of science, but rather of letting the Bible speak for itself and then trying to understand the geological data in the light of its teachings. You observe and then examine and compare objectively. You can't throw the Bible out because it's religion. There are certain things in the Bible that state things as they think that they're a fact. Let's observe and see if they are plausible to be fact. The approach of uniformitity is sterile and has led up a blind alley of hopeless paradoxes and contradictions, and therefore a new approach is timely and necessary. One must also first be convinced that a genuine, divinely given testimony concerning terrestrial and human origins is philosophically both possible and reasonable, and even necessary, and that we actually have such a testimony in the Bible. But you have to read it in an objective manner. Don't take a religious point of view, take an objective readership point of view, especially in the early chapters of Genesis that we look at. This divine record gives a basic framework within which to interpret earth history, and one must be persuaded that this will be the only sound basis of a true historical geology. Again, The way you see things today is not necessarily the way it happened in the past, even yesterday. The Bible plainly implies that there are at least 5 great epochs of history, each of which has produced substantial segments of the geological formations. Initial creation, final work of the 6 days of creation, pre-flood period, the flood, and the post-flood period. Now, the biblical record does provide a basic outline of Earth history. Whether it's true or not is not for us to do at first, but to review it and read it carefully, and then decide, within which all scientific data ought to be interpreted. It describes an initial creation accomplished by processes which no longer are in operation, and which therefore cannot possibly be understood in terms of present physical or biological mechanisms. It describes the entrance into this initial creation of the supervening principle of decay and deterioration, the curse pronounced by God on the whole creation, resulting from the sin and rebellion of man, the intended master of the terrestrial economy, against his creator. The record of the Great Flood plainly asserts that it was so universal and cataclysmic in its cause, scope, and results that it also marked a profound hiatus in terrestrial history. The surface of the earth completely changed. Thus, the creation, the fall, and the flood constitute the truly basic facts to which all the other details of early historical data must be referred. Within this basic framework, we have attempted to reinterpret the basic data of historical geology and other pertinent sciences, which at present are popularly and erroneously interpreted in a context of uniformitarianism and evolutionism. You can't assume these two are true and then impose it on what you cannot and have not observed. They're plausible. Let's look and see which is the most plausible. It's a point of view. So is the Bible's point of view. Examine them and give each one their due. Thus it seems most reasonable to attribute the formations of the crystalline basement rocks and perhaps some of the so-called Precambrian non-fossiliferous sedimentaries to the creation period, though later substantially modified by the tectonic upheavals of the deluge period, which is the Great Flood. Genesis chapter 6. The fossil-bearing strata were apparently laid down in large measure during the flood, and with the apparent sequences attributed not to evolution, but rather to hydrodynamic selectivity, ecologic habitats, and differential mobility and strength of the various creatures. As undetermined data of the strata, particularly in the upper levels, may have been reworked and redeposited during the later stages of the deluge, the flood, as a result of the great epeirogenic or continental uplift processes which ended the universal inundation. These processes and the hydrologic abnormalities accompanying them evidently continued with gradually lessening intensity for many centuries after the flood. Thus, many of the geologic strata, especially those attributed to the so-called Pleistocene era, may actually have been laid down after the flood, although related to residual catastrophism caused by the flood. And indeed, it is in the depth of the waters that almost all the strategic stratigraphic series which we have described were built up. Torrential waters spreading over the deserts and accumulating there prodigiously thick sediments, lagoonal waters on coastal plains in process of sinking, marine waters dispersing afar the muds and sands. Now, Maurice Chigenaud, in his book on strategic stratigraphic geology, the flood itself appears to have been due to a combination of meteorologic and tectonic phenomena. The fountains of the great deep emitted great quantities of juvenile water and magmatic materials, and the waters above the firmament described as precipitated torrential rains for a period of 40 days from above. Rain. The initial Creation Act affected the beginning of profoundly significant geological formations, and all of these are recent. Scriptural testimony of the initial creation stage of the earth. In the beginning, the Bible says God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1:1. The initial act of creation quite evidently included the structure and materials of at least the earth's core and some of crust and surface materials. The first description given of its appearance is that of water, the deep, covering its surface, and of a dense shroud of darkness enveloping it. Since light had not been created yet, there was darkness. It seems reasonable that, even if the earth's creation was accomplished as an instantaneous act, its internal heat and the waters on its face would immediately have begun to perform works of profound geological significance. We're going to move on down to evidence from observation of the details around rather than go into the scriptures. We're going to do that as we go through Genesis. So, the initial Creation Act affected the beginning of profoundly significant geological formations, all of which are recent. And we have physical evidence supporting the initial creation. The Earth's electromagnetic field indicates a recent creation. It may well be that the Earth's electromagnetic field had its beginnings on the first day of creation, just a number of millennia ago. As a matter of fact, the magnetic force of the Earth has been observed as diminishing at a predictable rate each year. If the Earth were billions of years old, even millions, then this magnetic force, having originated so long ago, would have been so huge as to be strong enough to pull up in a whole galaxy like a black hole would. Therefore, life on Earth millions of years ago would have been impossible, not have been possible at all. According to Dr. Thomas Barnes, the Earth's electromagnetic field has been found to be decreasing exponentially, losing 1/2 of its energy every 1,400 years. If we extrapolate and turn the clock backward, as weak as the field is today, causing such problems as depletion of the ozone layer with increased exposure to ultraviolet radiation, this means that 1,400 years ago it was twice as strong as it is today. This also means that 2,800 years ago, the Earth's electromagnetic field was 4 times as strong as it is today. When you go back in time beyond 8 to 10,000 years, you find the electromagnetic field of the Earth would have been so powerful that the existence of life would have been impossible. Many fine physicists have run calculations to show that if you extend as far back as 15,000 years, the energy on the Earth's magnetic field would approximate that of a magnetic star. Under such conditions, it would have been impossible for life as we know it to exist on the Earth. So, when we take the literal facts, we find that we don't have thousands and millions of years to deal with in relation to this intercontext of the days of creation. We find that, therefore, there must be a recent Earth in time. Now, Dr. Russell Humphreys states, the Earth's magnetic field is a powerful witness for a world much younger than the billions of years required by evolutionary theories. Let's start the story with the most prominent feature of the field today, its very rapid decay. The average intensity of the Earth's magnetic field has decreased exponentially by about 7% since its first careful measurements in 1829. The field's intensity includes components of strength and direction. It tells us the amount of force turning a compass needle northward. By estimating the field intensity everywhere, in, on, and above the Earth, we can calculate the total electrical energy stored in the field. Such calculations show that the total energy in the field has decreased by about 14% since 1829. This rapid decay of both energy and intensity was not widely known, even among scientists, until Dr. Thomas Barnes, a creation physicist, began publicizing in 1971.